everyone, my name is Chantelle Gilbert and I'm a Senior Planning Officer here at the City of Belmont. With me here tonight I have Lidija Langford, Murray Ralph and Wilmot Lowe. Wilmot Lowe is the Manager Planning Services here at the City of Belmont. Murray Ralph is the Manager of Infrastructure Development and Lidija Langford is the Coordinator Design Projects. Thank you for joining us here tonight. So we're here tonight to provide you with an overview of the draft Redcliffe Station Activity Centre Plan that has been prepared for the Development Area 6 precinct. And we also are here to provide an opportunity for the community to ask any questions that they may have on the draft Activity Centre Plan. You will see a link in the screen on your screens. This will take you to Slido, which is a platform that we're using for you to ask any questions that you may have tonight. Once you click on the Slido link, you will need to put an event code in, which for tonight is 4093. Please feel free to start asking any questions that you may have on the Draft Activity Centre Plan. And please note that tonight we will only be answering questions that relate to the Draft Activity Centre Plan. While you begin to submit your questions through, we will just be playing a brief video for you that will provide an overview of the Draft Activity Centre Plan.
Hi, my name's Lidija and this is Chantelle. We both work in the Strategic Planning Department at the City of Belmont. We are both working on the Development Area 6 project and we are here to provide you with an overview of the Draft Activity Centre Plan, which is currently out for public comment. To give you an overview of the Development Area 6 precinct, which is the area where the Activity Centre Plan applies, we've got a map here that sort of gives you an indication of where it's located. So it's situated between Grayson Highway, Tonkin Highway and Perth Airport in the suburb of Redcliffe.
The Activity Centre Plan has been prepared to coordinate future development of the precinct, which is expected to be transformed into a vibrant precinct with attractive public open spaces and streetscapes that contain medium to high density residential and mixed-use development.
The Activity Centre Plan operates in conjunction with the planning scheme. Design guidelines will also be prepared which will control specific built form elements within this precinct. The design guidelines are still being prepared. A development contribution plan is also proposed to be established to provide for cost sharing.
The Draft Activity Centre Plan process contains a number of steps. We are currently undertaking pre-consultation of the Draft Activity Centre Plan. Once pre-consultation concludes, we will then be reviewing all of the submissions and a report will be prepared for Council to consider how to progress with the Draft Activity Centre Plan. It is then anticipated that we will be undertaking formal advertising of the plan, and on conclusion of formal advertising, we will again review the submissions and prepare another report for Council, and then we will prepare a report for the Western Australian Planning Commission, who are the final and ultimate decision makers of the Draft Activity Centre Plan.
The Draft Activity Centre Plan shows future zoning and reservation over the land. There are two zones proposed, a mixed-use zone and a residential zone. The mixed-use zone is concentrated around the future Redcliffe train station and along Grayson Highway, and it's intended to provide for mixed-use development. So that is commercial development and residential development together. The residential zone is, as it says, it's for residential development. The Activity Centre Plan also shows reservation, which is public open space areas illustrated in green, and it also illustrates in yellow where the Redcliffe Primary School is currently located. The Activity Centre Plan also designates a number of R codings which correspond to built form controls in the residential design codes, which is a state planning document, and also relate to controls in the primary controls table, which we will talk to soon. The Draft Activity Centre Plan provides for a range of building heights from 2 to 8 stories, with an opportunity for bonus building heights up to 13 stories around the Redcliffe train station and along Great Eastern Highway.
The Draft Activity Centre Plan separates the area into 5 unique precincts. Each precinct contains unique built form controls.
This table illustrates the primary controls that are applicable to the Activity Centre Plan. As you can see, they are divided into the 5 precinct areas in accordance with the precinct plan that you saw previously. There are several key elements of this plan. One key element is the minimum development site area requirements. As you will see, in most instances, minus the urban corridor precinct, the minimum development site area is 1,600 square metres for development. The purpose of this requirement is to ensure that amalgamation occurs so that bigger development sites can be created to provide better development outcomes. There is also a minimum development site frontage requirement. As you will see, this is 30 metres for all precincts minus the urban corridor precinct. Consider that 30 metres represents the minimum requirement for at least 2 lots to amalgamate. This table also illustrates the site R coding which was shown on the zoning and reservation plan. There are also minimum site area per dwelling requirements. This is to control how small lots can go in order to build single houses and group dwellings in the precinct. So that is detached housing and townhouses or villas. The primary control table also includes minimum residential density requirements. The purpose of these requirements is to ensure that development is undertaken in a manner that will support the operation of the future train station and commercial development surrounding the train station precinct. The primary control table also includes maximum plot ratio requirements to control how much built form occurs on a development site. There are also minimum and maximum building height requirements, and as mentioned previously, there are also bonus requirements for both building height and plot ratio. The primary control table also includes minimum setback requirements.
The Draft Activity Centre Plan proposes new road upgrades, which include the construction of new intersection controls and traffic calming devices. The Draft Activity Centre Plan also proposes the construction of 3 new road connections.
The Draft Activity Centre Plan proposes 5 separate public open space areas. We have numbered each single one. Public open space 1, 2 and 3 are considered to be the main core public open space area. The southern main drain, which is an open drain that runs through the precinct, is proposed to be realigned through these public open space areas. Public open space 2 is proposed to be the main recreational space in this precinct, where we hope to deliver community facilities. Public open space 4 includes the area that immediately surrounds Redcliffe train station, and public open space 5 is provided behind Redcliffe Primary School. These public open space areas will comprise 8.72% of the entire precinct. The City of Belmont is also exploring opportunities for other public open space areas within this precinct. This includes the shared use of the Redcliffe Primary School Oval, which requires the City to enter into agreements with the Department of Education. Consultation on this opportunity is ongoing. There are also potential opportunities for public open space to be provided in the adjacent Perth Airport land.
Redevelopment of the precinct triggers the need to provide a range of infrastructure within the area. This infrastructure includes the realignment and landscaping of the southern main drain, the development of public open spaces, the construction of new roads, the upgrading of existing roads, the undergrounding of existing power lines, the upgrading of water and wastewater infrastructure, and the relocation of certain service infrastructure.
In order to provide infrastructure within this area, it is proposed to establish a development contribution plan. A development contribution plan is established under a planning scheme, and it's administered by state agencies or local governments. It operates by requiring landowners to make a financial contribution towards infrastructure when they choose to undertake any subdivision or development. The funds that are collected are then expended in accordance with an adopted staging plan. The Draft Activity Centre Plan outlines how the development contribution plan is intended to operate. It proposes to establish a contribution rate for each precinct area. This is on the basis that certain precincts place greater demand on the need for infrastructure compared to other precincts and therefore would provide a higher contribution.
Redevelopment of the precinct is expected to occur over an extended period of time. Therefore, the following priorities have been identified. Of high priority will be infrastructure works required for the operation of the Redcliffe train station. Also of a high priority will be infrastructure works required to deliver the public open space corridor, which is public open spaces 1 to 3. Following on from there, the upgrading of local roads and servicing will be undertaken, which will be also done incrementally. Finally, the delivery of public open space number 5 and the investigation of additional areas of public open space will be undertaken. The pre-consultation period of the Draft Activity Centre Plan has been extended until the 15th of May 2020. Submissions on the Draft Activity Centre Plan can be emailed to da6@belmont.wa.gov.au or posted to Lot Bag 379, Cloverdale, WA 6985. I hope everyone found that video informative.
Hi, my name's Lidija.
We'll now move on to the question and answer section of the night. To kick us off, I know that some of you may be wondering what a Draft Activity Centre Plan actually is. So Lidija, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chantelle. A
So I believe the video might have explained what an activity centre plan is, but I'll just go into a bit more detail. Centre plan is effectively a structure plan. It applies to land, and it effectively designates the future zoning of land. It's called an activity centre plan because it's intended to apply to an activity centre, which is, a place of activity. So the activity centre plan is obviously focused around the Redcliffe train station. It's intended to, like I said, stipulate zoning. It also sets out where public open space will go, what the future road hierarchy is. It even goes into details such as infrastructure, servicing and stormwater management requirements. The intention is that an activity centre plan will inform the subsequent stages of development. Activity centre plans are required to be effectively processed in accordance with the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes regulations. This is effectively a state government regulation that sets out the process for all structure plan proposals, and effectively that's what I think an activity centre plan is, and hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. Wilmot, we might just ask you one question as well. Some people may be wondering why we are undertaking a pre-consultation period on the draft activity centre plan opposed to hopping straight into formal advertising of the plan. Would you like to provide some clarification in relation to that?
Sure, thank you, Chantelle. So we are undertaking this pre-consultation period to give residents and owners of land as much information as possible prior to actually going to a statutory process, which has which has stricter timeframes or limits applied to that. In this pre-consultation process, we are trying to provide as much opportunity as possible for residents and landowners to ask us questions, for us to provide as much information as possible prior to going through the process of taking the activity centre structure plan through council and getting it formalised with the state government.
Thanks, Wilmot. That was great. Lydia, one question that I'm sure some people are eagerly wanting to know the answer to is, how long will it actually take for the planning framework to be adopted?
Okay, thanks, Chantelle. That's a good question, and I recall getting asked that question quite a lot at the information booth with residents a few weeks ago. I understand that everyone is quite eager to see the activity centre plan moving. It's a comprehensive document, so it actually took a lot of time to put it together, especially with a lot of the technical reporting that was involved. At this stage, we are undertaking pre-consultation. What will happen once we finish pre-consultation is there will be a process of us reviewing all the submissions that we've received, and we'll also be effectively reading through the document and making changes that we think respond to the submissions. What we will do then is effectively collate those changes and seek council's endorsement of those changes, whether or not they might want further changes. It will be ultimately their decision, and they will also be asked to make a decision on whether they would like this document to proceed through the formal statutory advertising process. As I mentioned before, activity centre plans or structure plans have to be progressed in accordance with the planning regulations, so that is effectively what sets out the statutory process for advertising, including for advertising and also for adoption. So once council have accepted it for formal advertising, we will then go through another advertising process. So that's another opportunity for residents to give us feedback and make submissions, and that includes on any changes that we might be suggesting that the structure plan will, we think should be made. And then following that, again, we will seek council's review of the submissions and endorsement of a recommendation to the Western Australian Planning Commission for their final decision on the activity centre plan, as they are ultimately the decision makers for this document. So in terms of timeframes, what we're looking at is late 2021. As I'm sure people will understand, reviewing submissions and writing reports and going through these processes do take time. And we obviously want to be considering things thoroughly and carefully before we take these things further. But we're aiming to have the planning framework in place by late 2021.
Thanks, Lydia. That's great. We've had a number of questions come through Slido, so thank you everyone for submitting your questions. One that's come through relates to public open space, and the question is, does the activity centre plan propose a lesser calculation of open space than the 10% requirements? Lidija, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the public open space that's shown on the activity centre plan is effectively the same amount of, or same spatial area that was shown on the vision plan. What happens when we calculate public open space is we have to deduct things like drainage reserves. With the southern main drain proposed to be realigned through the public open space, that area that is permanently wet is not counted as public open space. But also there is still effectively land of public open space. There's actually going to be more public open space provided than what is currently in this area. I believe it's about, I think it's 400 odd square metres more than what is currently provided in this area. I believe the figure is 8.72% of this area will be public open space, and that's spread across 3 key public open space areas that we've named. So we call them POS 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. POS 1 and 2 are the main POS areas, and yeah, effectively that's where we want the core of recreation to happen. And then POS 4 is the area around the train station, which is intended to be a plaza area, and then we've got public open space 5, which is shown as a green link behind Redcliffe Primary School. In terms to answer the question though, why is it less than what the government recommend as for 10%? It's effectively looking at opportunities to provide as much as possible, but also opportunities for consolidated development sites to get some early development happening in this area. But also the amount of public open space that has been provided is still achieving the state government's requirement for a minimum of 8% unrestricted public open space in the area. So effectively the way that works is within the 10% you should have a minimum of 8% that is unrestricted, so that's space that people can recreate and play in, and then you can have 2% of restricted space, which is effectively areas that can be flooded in winter and they're not as practically usable as unrestricted public open space. So we are achieving the 8% unrestricted requirement. We've looked at this and thought, well, you know, we could have more public open space in this precinct that is restricted and it's not actually usable. So I guess we're trying to focus on quality over quantity and getting a really high amenity outcome with the land that's shown. But worth noting that this isn't the final plan. If residents do feel that more public open space should be provided as land in this area, then I certainly encourage people to put that in as a submission, and that's certainly something that we will consider and take on board.
Thanks, Lidija. Just adding on to that question, there have also been concerns raised that the draft activity centre plan is actually going against the vision plan in relation to the locations of public open space along Brearley Avenue. Could you please provide some clarification around that?
Yeah, that's certainly, Chantelle. That's not true. I think it might be a misreading of the vision plan compared to the activity centre plan. What's shown on the activity centre plan through that Brearley Avenue reserve section is pretty spot on to what's in the vision plan, so there's not really any departures there.
Thanks, Lidija. Moving on to the next question that we've received. We've received a question as obviously when we prepare these strategic planning frameworks, there's a lot of input from other government agencies and including Perth Airport in this instance as well. The question is, do all government departments agree to this draft activity centre plan currently? Wilmot, would you like to answer that one?
Sure, Chantelle. Thank you for the question. There is quite a big task of coordinating all the needs of various people and community members and landowners within the precinct, but of course all the various government agencies, in this case the Public Transport Authority who's providing the train station, the bus services in the area, there's the Department of Water and Environmental Conservation, which have requirements regarding the drainage and the alignment of the southern main drain that runs through the precinct. So there is quite a big task in aligning all the priorities of various agencies and stakeholders within the precinct. It's finding that balance, and the city has been engaged with all the various agencies to determine where the tipping point is, what are the highest priorities, and what the best outcome for the precinct is going to be.
Thank you, Wilmot. Another good question that's come in, which Lidija, you touched on when you went into detail about when the planning framework will be adopted, is when will zonings actually be changed throughout the Development Area 6 precinct to reflect the higher density codings proposed in the Draft Activity Centre plan? Lidija, did you want to clarify some more on that one?
Absolutely. When we put together an activity centre plan, and when it is adopted by the Western Australian Planning Commission, they won't adopt it unless our planning scheme is concurrently changed, because effectively then you have a conflict between the zoning in our local planning scheme and with the activity centre plan. So what we need to do is effectively prepare a concurrent scheme amendment. The intention is that this will be progressed to council for their consideration when we take the activity centre plan to them for considering formal advertising. So that's a process that's still to come as well.
Thanks, Lidija. The next question we've received relates to Department of Communities developments, in particular within the Development Area 6 precinct. There has been a concern raised that the city is allowing a disproportionate amount of Department of Communities developments. Wilmot, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. The Department of Communities do have a couple of land parcels within the precinct. They are, I wouldn't say they're disproportionate to the number of properties overall in the precinct. From memory, there are two consolidated land parcels that are owned by the Department of Communities at this point. And the reality is that the City of Belmont does not determine what the Department of Communities develop or what land parcels are actually allocated to them. The land parcels that they own at this point have been in their ownership for a long period of time. The decision to acquire more properties is really one that the Department of Communities has full control over, and it's not something that the city can really control.
Thank you, Wilmot. Lidija, just adding on to the previous question that you answered in relation to timeframes when the planning framework will be adopted and to reflect those codings outlined in the activity centre plan, we've just had a follow-on question come in relation to the timeframes for the scheme amendment. Would you be able to provide some clarification on that question?
Sorry, I probably didn't make myself clear. Basically, the documents will be progressed concurrently, so the activity centre plan won't be approved unless the scheme amendment is approved alongside it. So they'll be done together, so it will be the same time frame of late 2021. That is what we're aiming for.
Thanks for that clarification, Lidija. Murray, your first question. We have had a question come in relation to traffic calming along Stanton Road and 2nd Street. The question is, will this be extended also to cover Epsom Avenue and Durban Street?
Yes, thanks for that, Chantelle. Look, technically, Epsom Avenue and Durham Street isn't part of DA6 or this activity centre plan area. However, the city's recognised for quite some time that there are issues and connections with 2nd Street, Stanton Road, and other streets, including Epsom, Durban. And in fact, we've recognised that obviously some of the other local streets in and around off of Stanton, Mooring Street, Lyle Street, for instance, are having issues with a certain amount of connections with rat running from things like couriers and what have you at certain times of the day. So over the last couple of years, the city's done quite an extensive traffic monitoring exercise over all these areas, which extends all the way down to Durban Street. So we're monitoring the traffic. Whilst it doesn't technically form part of the activity scheme and that plan, and that's why there's no plans which show traffic calming. Certainly, if there's any issues with those streets, as just work as normal from the city, we will actually implement any traffic management devices. Now, it's probably safe to say currently the traffic speeds that we're experiencing on all of those roads throughout Redcliffe West, as we call it, and East within the Development Area 6 area are all performing within acceptable tolerances. But we're monitoring that, and then we'll continue to monitor that throughout throughout the development of DA6. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Probably another question either for yourself or Lidija potentially is a question we've had come in relation to will a parking strategy be prepared prior to the opening of the train station? Murray?
Yeah, look, I can certainly make, excuse me, some comment on that. We're working towards that, certainly. The train station is going to be projected to be open in end of 20 or middle end part of 2021. Whilst the activity plan obviously will take some time to really get bedded down. So we're going to be working in conjunction with that. So we're recognising that the train station itself will have its own peculiar issues with parking and on-street parking. So we'll be working on that from now until the train station's open, and that will be then complemented within the activity centre plan as an overarching strategy. So yeah, look, we've recognised that the big generator will be the station to start with, and that's the task we've got to aim for.
I would just add some detail to that, Murray. There is a park and ride facility associated with the train station as well, with from memory 500 or so bays, and then of course there's a pickup drop-off area, or what we know as a kiss and ride facility for people around the area to get to have their family or friends drop them off at the train station. So that will assist with some of the traffic and parking relating to the train station. But of course, we certainly will be working with the Public Transport Authority and Transport to make sure that any parking management measures that need to be looked at will be explored at the earliest possible stage.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wilmot. Thank you, Murray. We've now had another question come in relating to whether resident submissions for the DA6 Vision Plan and Brearley Avenue closure have been incorporated into this draft Redcliffe Station Activity Centre plan. Lidija, could you please provide some clarification around that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously residents did put submissions in for the Vision Plan and the Brearley Avenue closure. They were separate advertising processes, so I believe there's another question here saying whether or not those submissions are added to this current submission period. The answer to that is no. If you've got, this advertising period is about the activity centre plan. It's not about the Brearley Avenue closure or the Vision Plan. Those processes have been done. The activity centre plan has been formulated from the Vision Plan. The Vision Plan was formulated from the submissions that were received. So in an indirect way, they've been certainly taken into account via the Vision Plan, but they're not reconsidered as part of this process.
Thank you, Lidija. What we might do now is we're just going to go for a short break in which we will play some question and answers on a video for you, and we will return shortly, so please stay tuned. guys, we're going to start with the ones in Slido. Thank you, everyone. So we'll now move on to some other FAQs that we've received. Lidija, this is probably one that would be best suited for you to answer. The question is, as the time frame for planning is expected to be finalised by the end of 2021, so the draft activity centre plan, how will this fit with the infrastructure that's actually required for the opening of the train station, which is anticipated before this date?
Thanks, Chantelle. Well, the train station, it is our understanding that the train station is due to open towards the end of 2021 as well. So the goal is that, the infrastructure that is needed for the train station is delivered before the train station will open. So that includes landscaping around the train station. That's some works that the PTA are doing. They're also constructing a roundabout at the intersection of 2nd Street and Boulder Avenue at the entrance of the Park and Ride facility. And they're also building some road connections that are around the train station. So all those works have to occur before the train station opens. There's also infrastructure that has been identified that just generally needs to be provided in this area. And as part of that, in the activity centre plan, for anyone that's come across it, it's basically been set up of what's high, low, medium priority. So some of the higher priority items, the goal is to have that infrastructure delivered within the first 5 years of effectively when the activity centre plan is in operation. So the main one is effectively upgrading and building POS 1, 2 and 3, so the main spine down Briley Avenue, and as part of that, the southern main drain realignment. So they're the two hot topic, high priority ones that are proposed to be delivered in the first 5 years.
Thank you, Lidija. Another question that I believe that you would be able to answer that's come through is in relation to a swing park in Boulder Avenue. And the question is why this hasn't actually been included as public open space, because there's a number of trees that are existing within that location.
Yeah, look, I believe the location that's being talked about is a small park that's at the corner of, I think, 1st Street and Boulder Avenue. There's quite a few mature trees in that area, and there's also actually quite a few mature trees even throughout the Briley Avenue Road Reserve. And look, that's been quite a priority for us through this planning process, trying to retain those trees. We want to obviously retain as many as possible. I believe that was a priority that was clearly identified through previous public consultation processes. And the key issue that we have with tree retention in this area is the southern main drain and the need to effectively align that in accordance with state government requirements. So effectively the state government don't want to leave the southern main drain as a ditch drain. That is not best practice water management. They want it to be effectively an urban stream that runs through these parkland areas. The public open space that is being talked about was never identified on the vision plan, so it has always been earmarked as being a development site, not public open space. So there's been no changes there, unfortunately, there are trees on that site like there are throughout the other public open space locations, and there's a lot of mature trees on properties in this area as well. Through state government requirements that have been introduced over the last couple of years, especially the new apartment code, tree retention is now a hot topic, and we hope that we can retain as many trees on private property, including that public open space, which will become private property, throughout the redevelopment of this area.
Thank you, Lidija. Murray, we've had a question come in relation to the southern main drain, and we were just hoping that maybe you could provide some clarification around that. The question details that there's a number of heavy flows which have occurred due to the developments of Costco and DFO. So maybe if you could provide some clarification around that.
Yeah, sure, Chantelle. Look, the southern main drain, we're working with a number of state agencies as part of this activity centre plan to come up with an urban stream design. Now, how it relates to the Perth Airport land is quite quite clear. Perth Airport are restricted on how much volume of water actually goes into the southern main drain from their activity area. So they've got what we call pre-1997 flow. So irrespective of the development that they actually produce on their master plan, things like Costco, the DFO and any other developments that they're going to do there, they've got to maintain the flows as they are pre-1997. Now, as part of that, they've actually done a lot of work to not only contain the flows on their site, but actually to do some enhancement environmentally. They're very environmentally sensitive now as an organisation, where they've got living streams and various environmental and water-sensitive urban design principles that they apply throughout their precinct. So there will be no more water going into the southern main drain from those new developments than what's expected and been designed for. So the challenge for the various agencies, including Water Corp, the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, and also for us to get a really good urban outcome from the realignment of the stream is to make sure that we can contain the water that goes down there, because it is at the end of the day carrying a fair amount of stormwater drainage. It's fundamentally, whilst it is a trench system, it is a delivery system to take stormwater drainage to the river and outfall it. So we want to obviously create something that fits into the activity centre plan with some great aesthetic outcomes. So that's what we'll be doing, but certainly we don't need to worry about anything that's on Perth Airport land as being detrimental to that.
Thank you, Murray.
Okay.
Lidija, following on from the previous question that we asked you in relation to trees on that subject site, another follow-up question has come in relation to, does that mean that developers will be required to retain the trees on that land, and will there be planning codes and regulations to reflect this as a requirement?
Look, the way the new apartment policy works is that developers are required to identify quite early on what their site context is, and that includes considering where there are existing trees, what neighbouring development there is, what orientation the development is. Is it north, south? Does it have good access to sunlight? And effectively, the way these new codes work is it's effectively a performance-based code, and you need to consider best practice, which includes tree retention where possible. So I can't say with certainty that every single tree will have to be retained. Trees will be assessed on their merits, as will the development in accordance with this performance-based code.
Thank you, Lidija. Wilmot, one question that a number of people may be wondering is, what is the actual anticipated population and dwelling growth within the Development Area 6 precinct?
Yes, thanks for the question, Chantelle. The draft activity centre plan suggests a potential development of between 2,550 to 3,600 dwellings, and that equates to approximately a population of 5,350 to 7,560 people. It's a range because it's not possible to predict exactly how many dwellings will be built, because it varies from site to site, and developers can choose to develop slightly more or slightly less, a slightly lesser number of dwellings on each site. And the timing of that is dependent largely on market conditions, what the landowners intend for their property, and it's difficult to predict ultimately how quickly this will occur. The draft activity centre plan itself does not compel any landowner in there to proceed with development, and some landowners may choose to stay there for the time being, or stay there through the whole period, and it's ultimately up to them when they're ready to then take on the provisions that the activity centre plan allow for as far as development on their properties go.
Thank you, Wilmot. Another question that we have had come in relating to the southern main drain, Murray or Wilmot might be in a position to answer this one, is whether that water has been tested for PFAS contamination, or if not, will it be required to be tested for this and other contaminants?
Yes, thanks, Chantelle. Yes, look, certainly the airport, as we all know, PFAS basically originated from the airport, the firefighting foam that was originated in the airport precinct. So the very strict guidelines on what the airport as an organisation has to do from a testing perspective on that. In addition, the city also does testing on our side of the fence, as it were. And obviously the agencies such as Department of Water, Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, Department of Health, as all agencies, I've got very strict guidelines. So in other words, the design that that will be developed will also have to have that regime factored into the design and the testing going forward. Otherwise, these agencies just wouldn't go forward with it.
Thank you, Murray. Lidija, we've had a question come in about land amalgamation and land assembly. I was just wondering, would you be able to provide some clarification around the requirements that are in the primary controls table for land amalgamation in order to develop in accordance with the Draft Activity Centre Plan?
Yes, of course. Look, this is quite a hot topic in this Activity Centre Plan. It's effectively what the presentation was talking about with the minimum development site area requirements. So effectively there's a table that's within the Activity Centre Plan document that details minimum site development requirements for most properties, bar properties in the urban corridor precinct, which is land abutting Grayston Highway. So for all other properties, the minimum site development requirement is 1,600 square metres. That figure has been worked out as a basis along with a minimum 30 metre width requirement for what we feel will fit the type of development that we want to see in this area. So a key issue with this precinct is how narrow lots are. We feel that apartment development or even some group dwelling development might struggle to really fit on these narrow lots. So a more consolidated site is considered a better outcome, effectively. Yeah, so basically the requirement is that to get the 1,600 square metres, nearly all properties will have to amalgamate with a second property, so like a neighbouring property, in order to meet that requirement in order to develop. I believe that some comments and questions that people had, and this came from the information booth that we held a few weeks back, is what if I'm one of the properties in the middle that misses out? What if all my neighbours develop without me and I'm stuck in the middle and I can never meet that 1,600 square metre requirement? The answer to that question is we wouldn't let that happen. Effectively, we wouldn't allow for a development outcome that effectively prevents other land from being able to achieve what the Activity Centre Plan is intending to achieve. That's not conducive to orderly and proper planning, and we are intending to make that more explicit in the Activity Centre Plan. That's a modification that we're already starting to think about because it's quite clear that perhaps it's not clear enough for people. So we've been looking at that already and thinking about how we could make that more explicit. So I hope that it explains it.
Yeah, thank you, Lidija, for providing that clarification. Another really good question that's come in relates to can residents develop their properties with the current zoning, given that the Draft Activity Centre Plan is only in draft form? Lidija, did you want to also provide some clarification around that one?
Yeah, short answer is no, they can't. How this area currently is set up in our local planning scheme is most properties are zoned residential with an R20 coding, and there's a special control area. It's called a special control area that applies to this area. We call them development areas, and it's the 6th development area that we have in our scheme. So they're all numbered, which is where the DA6 name comes from. The development area requirement basically said there needs to be a structure plan in place prior to any subdivision or development being undertaken in this area. So to answer the question, no, that special control area effectively prevents development from occurring, so that we can have development that occurs in accordance with what we want to achieve in the future. So we don't want to see development happen that effectively prevents our ability to implement the Activity Centre Plan and the Vision Plan. So that's how that functions.
Thank you, Lidija. Wilmot, a question has now come in that I believe you would be in best position to answer. It's in relation to the number of people who are actually participating in the question and answer session tonight or asking the questions, and will the city consider holding another information session with a bit more notice and explanation on the activity centre plan?
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for everyone who's participated and have been asking questions and submitting your questions through Slido. We certainly would like as many people to be asking questions and be involved as possible. I take that some may be viewing on YouTube, but may not be submitting questions. Some people may be happy to listen to the discussion and learn and absorb as much information as possible, and that's great. As always, we are open to take questions at any time, whether you want to email any of us or there's a DA6 email address for any queries you might have, or to lodge your submissions. Our phones are always open if you've got any questions, whether it's in relation to the draft structure plan generally, or whether it's specific to your property. We're always happy to talk to you, answer your questions, and clarify anything that you've seen or heard about the structure plan. To address any of your concerns or questions. As far as whether there's an additional session to this, it was originally planned that we had 2 Saturday sessions in the Brayley Park Reserve. We did meet with many of you on the first session. And then, of course, as things developed, we had to cancel all face-to-face meetings and gatherings, so that we didn't proceed with the second Saturday session. Tonight's session was, we had intended that the people, landowners, and anyone like yourselves who are interested to know more about DA6, to come in and have this discussion face-to-face with us. Due to the circumstances, we've had to change it to this online session. We're hoping that this will, as far as practical, address all the questions or as much of the questions as you have put forward as possible. But like I said, things are rapidly changing, and we're certainly open to hear you through email and phone in the first instance. At this point in time, we've extended the advertising or pre-consultation period till the 15th of May. So that's an additional month on top of what we originally intended, the 14th of April. Between now and then, we're always available for conversations and questions over the phone or email. So if there's anything that you wish to ask, we're here. And as things change and if there's a desire to, we are certainly happy to have more conversations with each and every one of you.
Thank you for that, Wilmot, and providing that clarification. One question that's come in is, will this information session that's being held tonight online be recorded? And the answer to that is yes, it will be recorded. So anyone who wasn't able to watch live, what we're on now, will be able to watch it later on our YouTube channel. Lidija, following on from that previous question in relation to whether people can develop their properties under the current zoning now, given the activity centre plan is in draft form, we've had a question come through from someone asking whether they can still put a granny flat on their property now. Would you like to provide some clarification on that?
Absolutely. The short answer is yes, you can. The activity centre plan, specifically on page 14, if anyone is keen to look it up, but the activity centre plan outlines instances where there can be a departure from the minimum site development requirements. So that includes, in order to be able to develop, obviously. So that includes if you want to put a granny flat in your backyard, the minimum development requirements aren't preventing you from doing that. You can still do that. Same with if you want to build a shed in your backyard, absolutely. Even minor extensions to your existing homes. And in terms of the minimum development requirements, there is a 5% variation that is being effectively allowed for by the activity centre plan. So it's not a strict 1600, it's 5% off that. But I don't believe that variation would capture many properties at all. So it is just to be a bit more practical in case there are instances where that does come up. And that's actually quite consistent with the approach that subdivision is how subdivision is run across Western Australia. There's always that 5% discretion that is applied for lot sizes.
Thank you, Lydia. One question that people may be wondering as well is, why does the Draft Activity Centre plan propose precinct areas? So I note that there's 5 unique precinct areas proposed as part of the Draft Activity Centre plan. Would you like to provide a bit of clarification as to why those precinct areas are proposed?
Yeah, absolutely. DA6 is different in different locations. Grayson Highway is different to, Canowar, it's different to Boulder. Every street is quite unique. And basically, the precinct areas are intended to sort of reflect a bit more of the character that's expected in each area. But it's also identified to effectively relay different development controls for different locations. So some of the precincts, such as the centre precinct, has greater allowances for taller buildings, just being immediately around the train station. That's effectively what that precinct is. It's intended to be a mixed-use development area with more intensive built form. And as you move further away from the station, the built form requirements and the precincts effectively change, and the building heights become lesser, the amount of building that's allowed on a property becomes less, and it tapers back up again for Grayson Highway properties that are fronting there. So again, you can build higher along Grayson Highway. Next to Redcliffe Primary School, the built form requirements are slightly lower than most of the other area as well. So, yes.
Thank you, Lydia. Wilmot, one question that's come in is, what's your view on value capture to fund these projects?
Thank you for the question. That is a really good question, and I must admit I'm not an expert in that field. I don't know if Murray or Lydia have any particular view on it, but we're certainly not experts in regard to value and the economics of things. I think that's something that perhaps needs to be put to a person with proper expertise in that field, whether it's a developer or the person with a person with proper economic background as far as value capture and development goes. So unfortunately, we can't answer that question. But yeah, no doubt it is a really interesting question, and thank you for that question.
Thank you, everyone. Well, I would just like to say thank you, everyone, for tuning in to our live stream tonight. We really appreciate all the questions that you've sent through. They've been great. I just wanted to let everyone know that if you do have any more questions after tonight's information session, please do email into us. You can email to da6@belmont.wa.gov.au, and all of us are more than happy to answer any further questions that you may have on the Draft Activity Centre plan. As Wilmot outlined, advertising on the Draft Activity Centre plan has been extended by about a month and will now conclude on the 15th of May 2020. And any submissions can be lodged to the city, can be emailed through to that same email address that I just provided, which is the da6@belmont.wa.gov.au email address, or they can also be posted to Lockbag 379, Cloverdale, WA 6985. And if anyone would like any further information, please also do visit our website, www.belmont.wa.gov.au. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a lovely night.